There's a moment in every collapsing culture when sanity becomes subversive. That moment, my friends, is now. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and Jung all foresaw it. When a whole society drifts into collective delusion, the few who remain lucid start to look insane. That's not drama, it's psychological law. When the center of perception shifts, reality itself redefines around the herd. The crowd doesn't merely agree on facts, it manufactures them through repetition, emotion, and selective vision. We call this mass psychosis, a condition where shared illusion replaces self-awareness as the operating system of culture. Look anywhere. Politics, media, religion, ideology, it's everywhere. Infecting thought faster than truth can heal it. But here's where it becomes tragicomic. Once the majority adopts delusion as virtue, clarity becomes heresy. The thinker, the rebel, the empath, those who still question the collective trance are dismissed as conspiratorial, neurotic, or mad. Yet maybe they aren't wild eyes in the dark, they're mirrors reflecting what mass delusion refuses to face. Ask yourself seriously, in a world addicted to noise, what does silence sound like, wisdom or madness? Mass psychosis isn't something abstract, it's the psychology of crowds seduced into safety by shared fantasy. It arises when fear outweighs introspection, when people outsource their thinking to authority, tribe, or trend. Descartes said, "To doubt is a sign of thought." But mass psychosis hates doubt, it thrives on certainty, which is why it spreads through moral outrage. Outrage unites people emotionally while blinding them intellectually. It tells you you're right, because everyone else is angry too. It replaces investigation with belonging. You stop asking what's true and start defending what feels good. The wise, however, remain allergic to certainty. They question movements even when the slogans sound benevolent. They know that every good cause, if swallowed whole, can mutate into fanaticism. Jung warned that the collective psyche, once inflated, behaves like a god. It demands worship. When you refuse its rituals, you're branded traitor, nihilist, or lunatic. That's the price of independent thought. To be misunderstood not because you're incoherent, but because you speak to those who've traded reality for narrative. And the brutal question is, would you rather be sane and alone or accepted and asleep?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
The most disturbing feature of mass psychosis is that it dresses like virtue. It doesn't say, be delusional. It says, be good. It offers moral shortcuts that bypass personal reflection. Just obey, repeat, align, belong. That's why intelligent people fall for it too. It flatters your empathy while stealing your agency. Schopenhauer noted that the masses resent wisdom because wisdom feels like emptiness. It dissolves illusions that comfort the will. The crowd wants meaning with minimal self-responsibility. Thus, conformity becomes moral ease. You don't need to be kind, you only need to signal kindness. You don't need to understand truth, you only need to chant its simplified version. Meanwhile, the wise, those who craft their moral vision through inner struggle, seem cold, detached, even cruel. Their independence triggers guilt in others. Their refusal to worship the crowd's gods is interpreted as arrogance. This, Schopenhauer warned, is the inevitable loneliness of intellect. When you stop lying to yourself, those who still must will see you as dangerous. In an insane world, sincerity becomes subversion. So maybe the test of sanity isn't whether others agree with you, but whether you can still disagree with yourself. But let's make this more practical. How do you know mass psychosis has infiltrated your thinking? Look for inversion of values. When truth feels offensive and lies feel compassionate, you're inside a collective trance. When public emotion outweighs private reflection, reason is in exile. Think about how fast ideas now travel. A sentiment virally reinforced millions of times becomes indistinguishable from truth. And this is where even the wise must tread carefully. Being aware of mass delusion doesn't grant immunity, it tempts you into the arrogance of opposition. You start to think, only I see clearly, which is itself a delusion. Jung called this the inflation of consciousness, the ego believing it embodies what it merely perceives. So wisdom must include humility. knowing that even seeing through illusion doesn't make you exempt from it. The wise must balance skepticism with empathy, courage with restraint. You can resist the madness without dehumanizing the mad. Because remember, mass psychosis is not a villain, it's a symptom of collective suffering. People don't crave illusion because they're evil, they crave it because truth, unaccompanied by love, feels unbearable. So here's a difficult question. Can you confront delusion without contempt? Or does knowing the truth make you cruel? Which brings us to Schopenhauer's haunting insight: the wise don't just see deeper, they feel heavier. Awareness multiplies emotional gravity. When the world erupts in confusion, the perceptive ones absorb it like lightning rods. They become vessels for what society represses: fear, grief, longing for meaning. The crowd escapes that pain through distraction, the wise endure it in silence, each carrying a fragment of humanity's unspoken despair. That's why wisdom so often looks like madness. It's a heightened sensitivity mistaken for instability. But Schopenhauer offered one hope: aesthetic contemplation. When reason can't fix madness, beauty can redeem it temporarily. Art, philosophy, and silence become refuges where truth transforms from torment into illumination. That's why the wise must never abandon creation. It's not indulgence, it's medicine. If collective insanity makes truth unbearable, beauty makes it tolerable. So when the next wave of hysteria comes, and it will, remember this: sanity is not agreement, it's equilibrium. The crowd will call you crazy for standing still, but maybe standing still while everyone runs blind is the sanest act of all. Every era has its heretics, they just wear different disguises. In the Middle Ages, the wise were burned at stakes. Today, they're burned through algorithms. Mass psychosis doesn't destroy its dissenters through fire, but through ridicule, censorship, and professional exile. The philosopher who refuses to parrot the consensus becomes unemployable. The scientist who challenges orthodoxy is marginalized. The thinker who asks forbidden questions is rebranded a threat. But here's the unchanging truth Schopenhauer identified: every generation rewrites sanity to protect its illusions. To expose those illusions is to violate its emotional security. That's why truth always feels like treason during collective hysteria. It destabilizes the stories that keep society coherent. Plato dramatized this in the allegory of the cave. The prisoner who escapes into the light returns to rescue his companions, only to be attacked. Why? Because his insight disrupts their fragile stability. People would rather kill the messenger than question their comfort. That's not evil, it's psychological inertia. The mind protects its delusions like a body guards a wound. When the wise point toward recovery, society defends its infection. I ask you, what's harder, to face madness within yourself or to confess your sanity to a world that calls it madness? The hallmark of every mass psychosis is moral panic. The crowd convinces itself that salvation depends on obeying one narrative, one authority, one dogma, and that disagreement equals danger. This dynamic is ancient. Schopenhauer described how human beings, driven by the will to life, cling to stability so desperately that they'll turn delusional systems into sacred relics. Religion, ideology, even science, once institutionalized, becomes a fortress built against uncertainty. But the truth seeker, guided by nothing but reason and moral conscience, doesn't belong inside fortresses. They live outside the walls in open exposure to chaos. This is why genuine thinkers seem reckless to the crowd. We don't cling to group identity for safety, we chase clarity even at the cost of belonging. Nietzsche called it living dangerously, constructing values upon shifting ground rather than inherited tradition. Yet this style of living has consequences. You lose the comfort of collective reassurance. You become a wanderer among maps drawn by others, forever crossing their borders with an invisible passport. Your freedom is exhilarating but isolating. How many of us secretly crave to be honest but settle for being accepted? And what if authenticity itself has always been the lonelier path? Now let's dig deeper into the mechanism that keeps mass psychosis alive: emotional contagion. Modern media has turned emotion into currency. Outrage and fear are its most profitable exports. Every scroll, every notification, every argument pulls you closer into the collective subconscious. We no longer think we vibrate. Schopenhauer couldn't have predicted smartphones, but his insights into imitation remain prophetic. He wrote that man has an innate herd instinct, a mental gravity toward conformity. This instinct is biological. It ensured survival when danger was physical. But when danger becomes psychological, ideological, virtual, or moral, this same instinct enslaves us. People obey trends not from reason but reflex, and those who resist the reflex threaten the whole illusion of shared safety. So we punish individuality with shame instead of force, humiliation instead of imprisonment. Yet for the philosopher, these lashes become badges of authenticity. Every insult from the maddened herd confirms that you've maintained inner clarity. And still, the wise must resist the temptation of self-righteousness, because the enlightened mind that despises the masses becomes itself infected by contempt, a subtler form of madness. Can we love humanity while seeing through its delusions, or does perception inevitably make compassion painful? Let's be honest. Surviving collective madness is not about winning debates, it's about protecting your inner equilibrium. Jung advised that when a world goes insane, the task of the sane is not to correct it, but not to join it. To achieve that, we must anchor ourselves in inner order. Build routines that reconnect perception to experience, touch something real every day. Talk with those who think differently, but honestly. Read not for agreement, but for challenge. The independent thinker must create psychic hygiene to counter society's contamination. Schopenhauer found refuge in profound silence and artistic contemplation. He claimed that beauty temporarily frees us from the blind will to observe without grasping, to exist without consuming. This, he said, is the Philosophers Paradise, a mind liberated from both collective hysteria and personal craving. It's not escapism, it's renewal. From that still core, you can re-enter the world with balance instead of bitterness, because longevity, not victory, is the true test of wisdom. You can't outshout a crowd, but you can outlast its deafness. So the question becomes, are you constructing your soul for endurance or merely performing sanity for society's applause? Here's the paradox we rarely acknowledge. Mass psychosis and genius are two expressions of the same hunger for meaning. The crowd projects its confusion outward to form movements. The wise individual dives inward to transmute it into understanding. Both search for coherence in chaos. The difference is direction. One externalizes despair through imitation, the other internalizes despair through contemplation. The wise look crazy because they're facing inward when everyone else rushes outward. But remember history: Socrates condemned, Galileo silenced, Nietzsche ostracized. Each was demonized in life, sanctified in hindsight. Wisdom often receives its validation only when the masses tire of their hysteria. Until then, the independent thinker must live as both witness and exile, a prophet in quarantine. But isn't that the noblest burden we could bear? To stay awake when the world demands sleep. To speak truth softly into the roaring void, knowing that understanding may not arrive for generations. Because wisdom, unlike popularity, measures itself not by applause but by endurance. So, when truth becomes treason, the task of the philosopher, the artist, the free spirit is not to shout louder, it's to remain lucid longer. Our rebellion must be calm, sustained, and rooted in compassion for those still trapped in illusion. Let the world call you mad, time will reveal who was dreaming. In every era of psychosis, sanity hides in plain sight, disguised as eccentricity, skepticism, even solitude. But the wise do not seek recognition, they seek alignment with reality. And reality, though harsh, always outlasts hysteria. You don't heal a deluded civilization by joining its noise, you heal it by preserving the fragment of truth that will rebuild clarity when the fever breaks. So ask yourself one final question: when the next wave of collective madness arrives, will you drown in it willingly or stand silently, anchored among the few who still remember what truth feels like to the uncorrupted mind? Every mass psychosis ends the same way: it collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. The illusion can expand only so far before reality punctures it. Hysteria, though loud, is unsustainable truth, though quiet, is immovable. History shows this pattern repeating endlessly. When the collective trance reaches its peak, the crowd begins to devour itself. The same moral certainty that once united it turns inward as purity tests, betrayals, and disillusionment. The mob forgets its original villains and starts accusing its own. That is what Nietzsche called the self-cannibalization of the herd when conformity pushes itself into exhaustion. The fever burns through because the body of civilization cannot sustain lunacy forever. And here's the astonishing part. When the illusion breaks, the wise, those who seemed crazy, lonely, or irrelevant become the architects of recovery. The same minds mocked as dangerous are suddenly summoned as healers. It's not that they changed, it's that clarity finally became visible against the ruins of delusion. Every post-hysteria era begins with the quiet return of thinkers who refuse to flinch. They become the lighthouses society once tried to extinguish. Maybe then, genuine wisdom is not recognition in life, but relevance after chaos. Schopenhauer understood this renewal as the pendulum of human nature. He argued that the masses must occasionally lose themselves in fantasy because it's the only way they evolve toward realism. Delusion teaches what reason could never persuade. When a civilization drifts into mass psychosis, it's staging a collective dream and unconscious ritual revealing what it cannot yet articulate consciously. Once the dream collapses, the fragments become wisdom. That's how progress actually happens, not linearly but dialectically, oscillating between clarity and confusion. The wise are necessary precisely because they preserve memory through madness. They remember the laws of reason, conscience, and proportion while everyone else is worshiping emotional idols. They are the keepers of thresholds. When the fever breaks, people return to them instinctively, seeking reconstruction. But this rebirth carries danger too. The newly rational crowd may swing into cynicism, mocking faith, meaning, or emotion entirely. This is merely delusion inverted into despair. True awakening, Schopenhauer warned, requires balance, seeing through illusion without condemning the dreamer. So, can you awaken intelligently? Can you witness madness end without turning bitter at humanity for having succumbed? Here's the paradox that every thinker must face after the storm. How do you rebuild society without recreating its next delusion? Human beings cannot live in permanent truth. Our psyches need stories, metaphors, and shared symbols to stay coherent. The wise must therefore translate clarity into compassion, not dogma. They must become storytellers of sanity. Instead of despising narratives, they must create better ones that point toward humility, interdependence, and self-awareness. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, acknowledging humanity's potential for madness without repressing it. Denying our irrational nature only makes it erupt stronger. That means the wise must teach balance, not perfection. They remind the crowd that freedom without reflection becomes chaos, and order without conscience becomes tyranny. The goal isn't to eliminate the irrational, it's to harmonize it. This humility is what differentiates sages from ideologues. Ideologues want disciples, sages want thinkers. And that's why every time clarity returns, it must be guarded delicately, like a candle cupped against the wind of human forgetfulness. How strong is your hand when the wind blows, and do you protect the flame or douse it yourself? The awakening phase is also intensely personal. When collective madness subsides, individuals feel both relief and guilt. They realize how easily they believed lies, how quickly they condemned, and how cheap their virtue became when tested. Many try to repair reputation, others bury memory. But the wise, rather than gloat or withdraw, use this moment to teach compassion. They know everyone is vulnerable to hypnosis of the herd. It's written into our evolutionary wiring. So, the philosopher's task after madness is reconciliation. To help people forgive themselves without excusing ignorance. To reintroduce introspection as culture's operating principle. You don't restore sanity by punishing delusion, you restore it by modeling integrity. Live as proof that clarity and kindness can coexist. In times of rebuilding, what the world needs most isn't brilliance, it's balance. The wise must become examples of inner order, showing others how to hold truth gently, not weaponize it. So ask yourself, if you ever survive societal hysteria intact, will you use your sanity to judge or to heal? Because history celebrates those who transform pain into wisdom, not those who declare they were right all along. Finally, we have to accept a haunting truth. Mass psychosis will return. Always. It's as cyclic as time itself. Humanity forgets because forgetting is merciful, unbroken awareness would be unbearable. Each generation must rediscover reason and lose it again. The philosopher's duty isn't to prevent the cycle, it's to ensure memory survives between cycles. That's why perseverance matters more than persuasion. The wise must keep writing, sculpting, teaching, recording, even in exile, even in ridicule, because their ideas become time capsules of clarity buried in the unconscious of civilization. When confusion resurfaces, those seeds awaken. The crowd will think the truth is new, but it never was. It was simply ignored until pain forced remembrance. So when I say mass psychosis makes the wise look crazy, what I really mean is this: wisdom doesn't fight madness head-on, it outlasts it. The day the fever breaks, society will grope for its forgotten philosophers, just as a patient seeks a doctor after refusing the medicine. And you, if you've stayed honest through the delirium, will find that survival was the ultimate rebellion. Because when delusion consumes the crowd, sanity becomes a secret act of faith. And in the silent patience of the wise lies humanity's best chance to awaken again.